around us through a philosophical lens, and viewer discretion is strongly advised. Access is restricted, but the dialogue is completely unlocked.
UFCU Official Post-Incident Briefing. Case File. Unappointed Authors. Earlier today, Uncle Frank was pursued by 3 unidentified flying objects while traveling on a otherwise perfectly normal stretch of road. The unidentified parties attempted to assume control of the vehicle using an unauthorized neon green beam. Despite their efforts, Uncle Frank remained unbothered. After determining that the occupants of the unidentified craft had not been appointed to direct the vehicle, Uncle Frank initiated emergency evasive procedures and successfully broke free. He then proceeded directly to UFCU headquarters, where the situation was secure behind a reinforced industrial blast gate. The UFOs were not granted access. And that brings us to today's lesson. Who gets to author your life? The unappointed authors are everywhere. Sometimes they look like other people. Sometimes they look like expectations. Sometimes they look like fear, pressure, conditioning, or circumstances that seem to pull us in a direction we never consciously chose. And the difficult part isn't always recognizing that something is influencing us. The difficult part is recognizing when we've accidentally handed it the pen. So today we're going to explore the difference between influence and ownership, between control and autonomy, and what it means to remain the author of your experience without believing you have to control everything around you. This is not a lesson about defeating the universe. It's a lesson about remembering that the universe doesn't automatically get to drive your car. Welcome to episode 2 of the UFCU. Now let's talk about the unappointed authors. You ever stop and wonder how much of your life is actually being directed by you, and how much of it is simply something you learn to follow? We grow up surrounded by instructions, what we're supposed to want, who we're supposed to become, what success is supposed to look like, how we're supposed to think, how we're supposed to behave, and eventually we can become so familiar with the script before we forget there even was a script. But here's where it gets interesting. Just because something is influencing your direction doesn't necessarily mean it owns your destination. Sometimes life feels like those UFOs chasing Uncle Frank down the road. Something is behind you, something is above you, something is trying to pull you somewhere you never asked to go, and sometimes it actually succeeds. The tractor beat drives the car, the wheels leave the ground. For a moment, the direction isn't yours anymore. But Uncle Frank doesn't panic. He doesn't start fighting the sky. He doesn't start screaming at the universe. He takes a sip of coffee, and maybe that's the part we miss. Being unbothered doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means you don't automatically become what is happening. Something can pull you without becoming you. Something can influence your circumstances without becoming the author of your consciousness. And sometimes we confuse control with freedom. We think freedom means I must control everything, every outcome, every person, every circumstance, every turn in the road. But that's impossible. Life has never offered us that kind of contract. People will surprise you, plans will change, doors will close, things will happen that you never asked for, and sometimes something you never saw coming will try to lift your entire car off the road. But maybe freedom isn't controlling the road. Maybe freedom is knowing that whatever happens on the road, you are still capable of choosing how you meet it. And that's where the gas pedal comes in. Because Uncle Frank doesn't defeat the UFO by becoming more powerful than the UFO. He simply refuses to surrender completely to the idea that the UFO gets to decide where the car goes. He presses the gas, the beam breaks, and suddenly he's moving again. Maybe that's what autonomy really is. Not absolute control, not certainty, not knowing exactly where you'll end up, but maintaining enough awareness to recognize when something is trying to write your story for you. Because there will always be unappointed authors. People who think they know who you should be, systems that tell you what you should value, fear that tells you where you shouldn't go, ego that tells you what you must protect, and circumstances that seem to say, this is simply how your story goes. But you don't have to fight every one of them. You don't have to convince them you're wrong. You don't even have to hate them. Sometimes you simply keep your hands on the wheel. You remain aware, you remain unbothered, and you keep moving. Because maybe the question isn't, can I control my life? Maybe the better question is, who am I allowing to author my experience of it? And perhaps there's another question under that one. What if the story doesn't need to be controlled to be meaningful? What if we don't need to know who wrote every chapter to experience the chapter we're living? Maybe some things were always going to find us. Maybe some roads were always going to appear. Maybe some events were always going to change us. But meaning doesn't necessarily come from controlling the story. Sometimes meaning comes from being fully present while the story unfolds. So if something tries to pull you off your road today, you don't have to panic. You don't have to fight the entire universe. And you don't have to become the disturbance. Take a breath, take a sip of coffee, look at what's happening, and remember, not everything that enters your experience has been appointed to author it. Stay awake, stay aware, stay unbothered, and keep on driving. This is Uncle Frank at the official UFCU headquarters, signing off.